Titan is a hypercoaster located at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, Texas. It is not only the tallest coaster in the entire state of Texas, it is also the fastest and the longest. Titan has a height of 245 feet and a top speed of 85 miles an hour with a track length of 5,280 feet. Its drop angle is 65 degrees and the entire ride takes 3 minutes and 30 seconds to complete. Each train holds 30 riders with an hourly capacity of 1,600. It is manufactured by Giovanola, which has manufactured a total of 2 roller coasters, Titan and Goliath. But you might wonder, what happened to Giovanola? You haven't heard about them before. That's because soon after they built Titan, their company went bankrupt. It wasn't due to anything relating to Titan, it was due to something completely unrelated, but still, that means that they've only built a total of 2 coasters. Titan opened on April 27, 2001 after being announced in November of the year 2000. It has been operating since then and has no serious injuries. The highest amount of G-force you pull is on the downward helix finale. You can have 4.5 Gs of force. In my opinion though, the first helix, which goes upward, actually feels more because the second helix has a brake run before it, which really slows it down so you don't experience as much of the G-force as you would otherwise. To start off, Titan leaves the station and goes into a slight curve leading up to the lift hill. Once it gets to the lift hill, it starts climbing for a long time. This is a big portion of the ride, and once it reaches the top, it starts cresting the edge and you have an amazing view of the sports stadium near it, of the parking lot, pretty much like a whole wide view, and then you start your drop. As you go down this drop, you'll experience a slight bit of airtime, not too much, but then you'll see a big tunnel approaching. You go through this long tunnel and then you emerge going right up into a big banked turn airtime hill. You don't get much airtime on this hill, if any at all, but it's very fun and it's a very interesting part. Then you go back down, back up, and you go into an actual airtime hill. This is the most airtime you experience on the whole ride. Then you go into an upward helix. This is a very long helix, very forceful, and I'll get talking more about this one later, but it's a very, very fun part of the ride. Then you get to a brake run, which kind of slows down the entire pace of the ride, which kind of hurts it, but I mean, what can you do? It's to prevent people from blacking out in the second helix, which is coming up. Now you do a slow turned dive back down towards the ground. It's not too fast, a little slow, and then an overbanked turn. You dive back down, you go up a little bit, and then here's your downward helix near the end of the ride. You do this long downward helix at a fairly slow speed because of the brake run earlier in the ride, but once you finish out this helix, you do another banked turn to the left, loop back around, and then you are pretty much doing one more banked turn. Just the rest of the ride's kind of banked turns like this, and you go into the brake run. So that means that you're pretty much done with the entire Titan ride. But Titan is a lot better than that, because Titan is very forceful. You only have one really moment of airtime at that one airtime hill that we saw, but the helixes have very, very intense forces because you're going at them at such a high speed, you're being pressed into your seat. The amount of positive G's are very intense, and you can definitely feel it. I definitely blacked out a little bit on this ride. The amount of G's on this ride is the most positive G's I've ever felt on a hypercoaster, and I really enjoyed it. I actually rode this twice, and then I didn't want to ride it again because of how intense the G's were. But to start out, when you go up the lift hill, you see quite a bit of scenery around. It gives you a lot of time. You can pretty much see every ride at the park. It's kind of in the back of the ride. You're near the parking lot, so you can kind of just look out, see the Texas Rangers Stadium, I'm pretty sure is the one it is, and then you just keep looking around. You contemplate the ride ahead of you. Then all of a sudden you reach the top. And if you're in the very front row, then it's a very smooth ride, at least until the helix, but you don't really get too much forces, too much of that. But if you're in the back row, you get pulled over that first drop and then you're diving straight down. This coaster is really cool because it has a tunnel. Like, it goes right when you get to the ground. Instead of just stopping and going along the ground, it actually adds 10 more feet. So instead of going a 245 foot drop, it's a 255 foot drop because it goes 10 feet underground. Not only that, once you get out of that, you go up into this really tall thing. It's a banked turn, doing like a U-turn back the way you came. Then all of a sudden you go back down, and then that airtime hill actually provides quite a bit of airtime. Sadly, that is the only airtime moment on this ride, but that's okay. Another thing about Titan is that once you get to the helix, you don't even expect the helix to have that much intensity, but it really does. This helix is insanely powerful. It is probably the most powerful helix I've ever experienced, just because of how intense the forces are on it. And I've heard from multiple people that this helix has very intense forces. and one of the most that they've ever felt on a ride. Sadly, this is some of the only forces you feel on this ride. There's a lot of downtime on this ride where you're not doing much. It's just like small bank turns. You're going fairly slow along the course of the ride. But once you finish out this helix, then you hit the brake run. It's a very intense brake run. You like slam into the brakes. It slows you down an insane amount, and then you're just like pretty much to a halt. When you start going into the next thing, you're like leaning over the edge, so it just feels like you're gonna like lean out of your seat almost, because you're just like leaning, because you're going so slow that it just doesn't comprehend all of that. You're just going so slow that you can't really feel any of the forces. You just feel like you're hanging. So this part of the coaster is when the ride starts going kind of downhill. There's not really two intense sections. The second helix would be very good if they didn't have a brake run slowing it down right before that. But another good thing about this ride is that it's located next to the New Texas Giant. So you can ride these rides back to back. One of the two biggest rides in the park. They're both right next to each other. They're both pretty fun rides, and I would definitely recommend getting there early, because these rides both get fairly long lines the more you wait throughout the day. And these lines are very painful to wait through just based on how the ride feels, because the queue and theming isn't really that well themed in either of these rides. There's pretty much no theming in Titan. So when you're on it, it's just a really fun hyper coaster, the tallest coaster in the park, tallest, fastest, and longest in Texas, actually. But this entire coaster I really enjoyed. I would definitely go back, ride it again. And you're probably wondering, what would my final rating be? Well, thinking about it, I would probably give this coaster a 6.5 out of 10. Why not a 7? Because it has a lot of downtime moments, and that mid-course brake run caused a lot of problems. That's the main things I have against this ride. The mid-course brake run is very hindering to it, because you're just slamming the brakes and you're pretty much stopped, and you're slow for the rest of the ride. And another hindering thing is just, there's parts of this ride I've noticed that most of it's very smooth, but there was like one spot that I noticed it was rattling a little bit. It could have just been the train I was on or something, but I noticed that. Finally, this coaster, the queue for this coaster is very, very, very well hidden. It's like located on a tiny sign where it looks like it's behind some picnic tables. It's like you have to go under a bridge, through like under the railway, a ton of stuff. It's like most people don't even know how to find this, because that's what also contributes to some of the less lines. Like New Texas Giant will have a 2.5 hour line, whereas this will only have 45 minutes. Not because people technically like this one less, but because the lines are easier to spot the entrances for New Texas Giant than it is for this, because this is hidden right in a corner, hard to find. Which, I mean, if you like rides and you want the coaster credit, this one's less important to come to very first than New Texas Giant, but I would still recommend definitely doing this ride for a good hypercoaster experience. So overall, I really liked Titan at Six Flags Over Texas. I feel like there were a lot of things that could have gone better on it, but overall, this ride is a very good hypercoaster, one of the better ones I've ridden because of just how intense the positive G-forces are. I've never experienced a more positive G-force on a roller coaster than on this one. So, after concluding this, 6.5 is the rating that Titan will get, and I think Titan deserves that. Six Flags Over Texas is a great park, and Titan is a very good roller coaster to add to their roller coaster lineup. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below, as it really does support the channel. Ride safely!